You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Neo4j, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. I started off 2025 with some exploration into generative AI and graph technologies, which I'm really enjoying so far. I'm hoping to continue more into that next week after some technical travel that I'm doing this week. Then I came across an article for increasing YouTube audience for educational content, which actually overlaps quite nicely for developers and developer advocates. Without further ado, let's dive right in. The first thing I played a little bit with was actually a private repository on Neo4j, generative AI, and Java, which I'll come back to in just a second. But in order to get the data loaded for playing with that, I ended up needing to use the Neo4j generative AI plugin functions and procedures in order to actually create the embeddings and to load that, save that back to the database. The first thing I will note is that there was something in the documentation that syntax wasn't quite right. I've submitted a PR for that, and I'm hoping that that will get pushed and updated soon. So don't fear on that. The second thing is that there are some differences between just encoding or creating an embedding for a single value and then creating embeddings for a batch or multiple values. The first, to create a single value, I was trying to do that, and I kept getting an error that the procedure was not available, couldn't find it, couldn't use it, etc. What I ended up finding out is that I was trying to use it as a procedure, when in fact, to create a single embedding for a single value is a function. So you utilize it inside the query a little bit differently. As a function, you can use it as part of a chaining between queries. For just that one value, you could call the function to create the embedding and then use that to save the property onto the node, etc. But you don't typically use the function as a separate call for pulling in multiple values and then saving multiple values back. So again, function is going to be a little bit more working with each individual entity itself. Whereas when you encode a batch or you're saving and creating embeddings for multiple entities, then that is a procedure, which means you'll have a separate call statement and you'll typically pass in a bunch of values. You'll create the embeddings for those and then save those multiple values back to each entity itself. It works a little bit differently. The documentation does clarify that one is a function, that one is a procedure, but that was actually something I missed. And when it popped up that it couldn't find a procedure, I did a show procedures. The batch one showed up, but the single one did not. That's because you have to do a show functions in order to see the single one, but then of course it doesn't show the multiple. Just so you're aware, one is a function, one is a procedure. So if you are utilizing one or the other incorrectly, that error message maybe isn't quite as clear as I would have liked it to have been, but the documentation shows it accurately, at least something that I missed. The private repository that I was playing with once I got the data loaded was a Neo4j generative AI Java repository. This is a private repo right now, but hopefully we'll have something public in the works here soon. But this is an experiment that's going on within Neo4j. We have an external Python package that is very similar, or this one is trying to reproduce some of the functionality and capabilities that are available in the Python one. But this lets the package be aware of Neo4j and its domain specifics while allowing you to interact with LLMs and AI things and query the database and the data using it within a retrieval augmented generation architectures. But you don't have to use a whole framework or spin up a whole separate application. You can actually just write like a JBang script, query the database, add retrieval queries on top of that, and filtering for the data and so on. That is pretty nice, actually, just out of the box. I hope to have a better update for you on that, but I did get to play around with that. It was really fun this week. The content I wanted to highlight is an article that I came across in a newsletter that's called How to Get Your Educational Videos to a Broader Audience on YouTube. This popped up in the Descript community, one of the newsletters for Descript, which I use for this podcast actually, but it's geared towards all YouTubers, so general YouTubing, but it works really well for technical and advocate purposes. The content here I felt was super valuable to creating developer content. There are a few things that the article covered. I'll just walk through some of those and how they apply to technical audiences. The first thing mentioned in the article is to ask great questions. It may not be entirely new for those of you who have created a lot of technical content, but I've heard a variety of different people say, look at things that you're curious about, things that you have trouble with and couldn't find answers to. Produce content on that. Think like a viewer is the way the article phrases it, which I really love. So think like a developer, think like your user, think like the viewer. What are the things that they're interested or trying to solve, the problems they're running up against? And can you create content that fills in those gaps or that answers those questions? They give in the article a couple of examples on, for instance, why do Egyptians like cats so much? And the actual content piece was trying to get awareness for a museum exhibit, but in the meantime, it surfaced and solved a question that was very common and popular amongst broader audiences. Really helpful example there, and they gave a couple others that I thought were super interesting too. The second thing that the article mentions is to tweak your intro. There's so much content available nowadays, whether you're technical or home improvement or just learning about content creation or something. There's all kinds of content in short form and long form and anything in between. The article talks about try to give viewers a reason to stick around past a few seconds or those first 30 seconds or minute or whatever it is. The examples they gave are to iterate your premise or the title of your content, to add a visual component that kind of pulls viewers in a little bit, and some other things as well. Again, trying to get people past that initial phase of just catching their attention. You have to keep them engaged in that content too. The next thing the article talks about is to channel your viewers' interest. Now, this is, I think, something that developer advocates and audiences do already pretty well, but it is a good reminder to use examples and perspectives that appeal to your specific audience. For instance, for developers, it could be talking about science fiction or data, gaming, or a particular caffeine of choice, for instance, coffee, tea, or soda, or what have you. Anything that's going to naturally appeal to your audience that people are already curious about or have fun with, that's going to be an increase in connection with people in general. The next thing the article talks about is to collaborate. And of course, this has to be appropriate collaborations, cross pollinating your channels. You can't just chase influencers. You want to look for things that appropriately overlap with your audiences. But there are some really cool things that happen when you can collaborate with similar and yet new people as well. You get those improvements to both channels. You get different perspectives and ideas from the other collaborator, brainstorming, plus the increase in interest from both of your audiences and your typical viewers. The next thing the article looks at is research, looking at what others are producing. I will add a caveat to this that I think you have to watch out, at least in the technical spaces, for oversaturation, but it is a good indicator of what people want to know about. For instance, you have a lot of just general AI content out there. If you search for AI tech content, you're going to find just an overwhelming amount. But if there's something that you feel is a gap in the current AI content space, or if you think something could be added on for better interest or something that's missing or some help or something that you found super helpful while you were learning the content, then I think that's a perfect, not really niche, but just a gap that you could fill in that content. You can't just produce what everybody else is doing. I don't think that's super valuable, just adding to the oversaturation problem, but I do think there's value in looking at what people are interested in and what people are currently learning. The next thing on the article's list is to repeat your successes. I've heard this actually in a couple of different channels now. This is not the only place that I've seen this, is that often as content creators, we don't want to do a topic more than once. We'll cover the topic and then we move on to something else. But if that topic is really popular, that actually provides opportunities for you to dig a little bit deeper into the content and develop that a little bit more. Maybe there's additional topics or related things you could go on to. You could delve just a little bit deeper into something you covered at a high level and so on. The last thing the article wraps up with is to experiment. Remember that you might find something that works better. Don't be afraid to maybe just move fast and break things a little bit. Explore some different things, experiment, iterate, and improve over time.
It's been a busy week already, but I'm really looking forward to everything that the technical industry and hopefully me and you personally will accomplish this year. I started the year off right with exploration and playing around with code, and then I looked at tips for creating better content. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.